It's funny how history can feel both distant and incredibly close. I read about someone whose grandparents found an unexploded bomb in their garden from World War II, just sitting there.
Wow. Yeah, that really brings it home, doesn't it? The sheer scale of the bombing.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, amidst all that destruction, was anyone thinking, could we do this differently? Could war from the air be, I don't know, more precise?
That's precisely the story we're getting into today. It centers on this group they call themselves the Bomber Mafia,
Yeah.
American airmen back in the 30s who were just completely captivated by the idea of air power.
But not just bombing for bombing's sake, right? Their dream was different.
Right. They envisioned something cleaner, more surgical,
No.
hitting specific targets, avoiding mass casualties. The core idea was fighting smarter, more effectively through precision.
Okay. And our main source for this deep dive is Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Bomber Mafia. It really digs into their technological obsession, this dream, and, well, the often unexpected, sometimes tragic ways it played out.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at the intersection of ideas, technology, and the brutal realities of war.
So our mission here is to really unpack the main threads of this story, the key figures like Carl Norden and his almost mythical bomb site, and how this whole concept of precision bombing evolved, or maybe devolved, during World War II. We want to give you the core insights without getting too bogged down.
Sounds good. And you almost have to start with Carl Norden himself. He's central to the whole thing.
The engineer behind the bomb site.
Exactly. A Dutch immigrant, apparently quite brilliant, nicknamed Old Man Dynamite. And get this, supposedly a classmate of Lenin back in Switzerland.
Lenin. Wow. Okay. And the book paints him as not the easiest guy to get along with.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Prickly, perfectionistic, incredibly secretive about his work. But that perfectionism, that absolute obsession with getting it right, that was key.
He was chasing this almost impossible goal, right? Hitting a small target from, 20,000 feet?
Yeah, think about it. High altitude, wind, plane movement. It's an incredibly complex physics problem. And remember the context. The trauma of World War I, the trench warfare nightmare. People were desperate for a less bloody way to fight.
And the airplane seemed like the answer. This new technology.
It offered this tantalizing possibility. And guys like Donald Wilson, one of the early air power theorists, really latched onto it. He had this vision. War decided not by millions slogging it out on the ground, but by air power crippling key industrial points.
Like finding the enemy's Achilles heel.
Pretty much. The choke point idea. He believed industrialized nations had these vulnerabilities, maybe one factory making a crucial ball bearing or a specific type of engine part. Take that out precisely, and you could grind their war machine to a halt.
Avoid the mass slaughter.
That was a dream. And the place where this dream really took root, where these ideas were nurtured, was this school down in Alabama.
Ah, the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field.
Right, in Montgomery. Gladwell called it the birthplace of a revolution. It was kind of isolated, away from the traditional army brass, which gave these airmen freedom to think radically.
So who are the key players there, besides Wilson?
Figures like Harold George. They saw themselves almost as crusaders, preaching the gospel of air power and precision bombing. They were pushing back hard against the prevailing military thinking, which was still focused on armies and navies.
And they really believed in this choke point theory.
Absolutely. They developed this incredibly detailed plan, Air War Plans Division 1, or AWPD-1. It literally mapped out specific targets in Germany, power plants, factories, transportation hubs.
Based on that choke point idea, I like that story about the Pittsburgh flood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The flood knocked out one factory making propeller springs, and it suddenly grounded a whole bunch of planes. That was their proof of concept, you see. Hit the right small target, have a massive effect.
Okay, so they have the theory, they have the plan, they have Norden working on the technology, but then comes the reality check. Europe, World War II.
And that's where Ira Eaker comes in, a key member of the Bomber Mafia, a true believer. He gets command of the 8th Air Force, based in England, tasked with putting this daylight precision bombing theory into practice against Germany.
But the British had a very different idea about bombing, didn't they?
Oh, completely. The RAF, led by Bomber Harris later on, had embraced area bombing entire cities at night. Their goal wasn't precision, it was breaking civilian morale, destroying the workforce, dehousing the population.
After what they'd endured in the Blitz.
Exactly. They were deeply skeptical of the Americans' almost religious faith in the Norden bomb site. Could it really be that accurate, especially over cloudy, defended Europe? They thought the Bomber Mafia's aim to narrow the scope of war was naive. They wanted to broaden it.
So a fundamental clash in strategy and maybe even philosophy.
Definitely. And it came to a head at the Casablanca Conference. The British, including Churchill, put immense pressure on the Americans to join their night bombing campaign. They saw the American B-17s flying daytime missions and getting shot up.
And thought it was wasteful.
Right, or at least not effective enough. Eaker had to really fight to defend the precision bombing concept, even making a personal appeal to Churchill.
And Churchill had his own advisor pushing for area bombing too, right? Lindemann?
Yes, Lord Cherwell, Frederick Lindemann. He had this coldly analytical view that bombing working-class homes was the most efficient way to break German morale. Very different from the Bomber Mafia's focus on industrial targets.
So you have Eaker trying to stick to precision, Harris doubling down on area bombing. What happened when they tried the precision raids? Like Schweinfurt.
Ah, Schweinfurt. The ball-bearing factories. That became the symbol of the dream meeting harsh reality. Multiple raids deep into Germany, daylight.
High cost.
Disastrously high, huge losses of planes and crews. They inflicted damage, yes, but couldn't knock out the factories completely, and the cost was just staggering. It really shook the faith in unescorted daylight precision bombing.
But they didn't give up entirely. I mean, the movie 12 O'Clock High seems to capture that persistence.
No, the belief was strong. But the Schweinfurt raids led to changes. Eaker, despite his commitment, was eventually reassigned. The costs were just too high for the leadership back in Washington.
And there were moral challenges, too, even within the precision framework, like that bombing of Minster Cathedral.
Yeah, that incident highlighted the tension. Orders came down to bomb the city center of Minster, including the cathedral, as a sort of morale target after heavy losses. And General Hansel, another key Bomber Mafia guy who we'll talk more about, was reportedly appalled. It went against everything they stood for, targeting civilians or cultural sites.
So the European experience really tested, and maybe even cracked, the original dream.
It absolutely did. The technology wasn't quite there. The defenses were stronger than anticipated. The weather was a huge factor. The dream ran into a very messy reality. Which then shifts the focus, right, to the Pacific. Exactly. The war against Japan. And now Haywood Hansel, that general dismayed by the Minster Order, gets his chance. He's put in command of the new 21st Bomber Command, flying the B-29 superfortresses from the Mariana Islands.
The B-29, that was supposed to be the ultimate bomber, wasn't it? High altitude, long range.
The cutting edge. But it was also rushed into service. Very complex, lots of mechanical problems initially. Engine fires were a huge issue.
And the bases in the Marianas?
Primitive. Think Quonset huts on scraped-out islands. And the logistics of flying missions all the way to Japan and back were immense. But the biggest challenge, the one they didn't even know about at first, was meteorological.
Ah, the jet stream.
The jet stream. These incredibly powerful winds whipping along at altitudes where the B-29s were designed to fly for precision bombing, sometimes hundreds of miles per hour.
How could you possibly bomb accurately in that?
You couldn't. It threw the Norden bomb site calculations completely off. Bombs were scattered everywhere. And ironically, a Japanese scientist, Wasaburo Uishi, had discovered and documented these winds years earlier.
But nobody in the U.S. knew.
He published his findings in Esperanto.
Esperanto, you're kidding?
Nope. So this crucial piece of intelligence was basically lost in translation.
Incredible, right? Wow. So Hansel's trying to do high-altitude precision bombing, sticking to the Bomber Mafia playbook.
Against industrial targets, yes. But between the jet stream, persistent cloud cover over Japan, and the B-29's teething problems, the results were poor. Very disappointing. Pressure starts mounting from Washington. They need results.
And this is where the temptation, as Gladwell calls it, comes in.
Exactly. While Hansel is struggling, back in the U.S., scientists at Harvard, led by Louis Pfizer, have developed a new weapon.
Napalm,
an incendiary gel. Initially, the idea was maybe using it precisely against certain targets, but tests, like those at the Dugway Proving Ground on replicas of German and Japanese buildings, showed its terrifying potential for starting uncontrollable fires.
Especially against Japanese cities, which were largely wood and paper.
Right. So the temptation became, forget precision, forget hitting factories from high altitude, use napalm. Go in low at night and just burn everything down.
A complete reversal of the original Bomber Mafia doctrine.
The absolute antithesis. And Hansel, true to his principles, resisted. He kept trying to make precision bombing work, focusing on aircraft engine factories. He believed braining cities was morally wrong and strategically questionable.
But the pressure for results was too high.
Immense. Washington wasn't seeing the factories destroyed. Japan wasn't surrendering. So Hansel was removed from command.
And replaced by
General Curtis LeMay.
LeMay, A very different kind of commander.
Totally different. Pragmatic, cigar-chomping, absolutely results-driven. He looked at the situation, the failing high-altitude campaign, the B-29 issues, the nature of Japanese cities, the availability of napalm, and made a brutal calculation.
Forget precision, go for destruction.
Pretty much. He famously ordered the guns and ammunition stripped from many of the B-29s to carry more bombs and told them to go in low at night.
It's low over Japan. That must have terrified the crews.
Their mutiny, apparently. Flying low meant they were vulnerable to even light anti-aircraft fire. LeMay even flew on the first major low-level raid himself to show it could be done. He was nothing if not hands-on.
And the target was Tokyo.
March 9th, 1945. Operation Meeting House. Hundreds of B-29s flying low, dropping massive quantities of M69 napalm bomblets, designed specifically to spread fire through Japanese-style housing.
The result was
A firestorm. A literal firestorm. Winds generated by the heat, immense temperatures, 16 square miles of Tokyo incinerated. Estimates vary wildly, but likely around 100,000 people killed in one night. More than died initially at Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
just unimaginable destruction.
And LeMay didn't stop there. He systematically firebombed dozens of other Japanese cities in the following months, just relentless destruction from the air.
And he felt this was necessary.
He believed it was the only way to force Japan's surrender quickly and, in his view, ultimately save lives by avoiding a ground invasion. He even reportedly felt the atomic bombs were superfluous because the firebombing was already doing the job.
It's jarring how far that is from the initial dream of precise, almost clean air warfare.
It's a complete inversion. And what's striking is how unaware some high-level figures, like Secretary of War Stimson, seem to be about the sheer scale and nature of the firebombing campaign. LeMay was given a job, and he did it with brutal efficiency.
So where does that leave us? This whole story.
Yeah.
It seems to end with the dream being completely abandoned in the face of wartime reality.
In one sense, yes. LeMay's approach delivered the immediate devastating results that Hansel's couldn't, at least not in the Pacific context. But Gladwell brings it forward with his interesting anecdote.
The one at the Air Force gathering place, the Air House?
Yeah. He describes modern Air Force generals talking about the capabilities they have now. Guided bombs that can hit a specific room or even a specific person within a building. Incredible accuracy.
The kind of precision Norden and the Bomber Mafia could only have dreamed of, literally.
Exactly. So, in a weird way, the technology finally caught up to the dream. We can be that precise now.
But that capability brings its own questions, doesn't it? As those generals apparently acknowledged.
Absolutely. The temptation to use force when it seems so clean and surgical. The ethical considerations haven't gone away. They've just changed shape.
So it's this complex legacy. LeMay won the battle, in the Pacific, you could say, achieved the immediate objective through brutal means.
But maybe Hansel's vision, the ideal of precision, of minimizing collateral damage, ultimately won the war in terms of guiding principles. It's that ideal, however imperfectly realized, that shapes how modern air forces try to operate, even with all the ethical complexities.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've followed this arc from this really idealistic vision of precision bombing, born out of WWI's horror.
Through the technological hurdles, the Norden site, the clash with British strategy, the brutal realities of Europe.
But to the specific challenges in the Pacific, the jet stream, the rise of napalm, and LeMay's devastating firebombing campaign.
And finally landing on this idea that today's technology has, in a way, fulfilled the Bomber Mafia's technical dream. But the moral questions are perhaps even more complex now.
It really shows how technology, strategy, individual personalities, and moral beliefs all get tangled together in wartime.
Definitely. And it leaves us with a pretty heavy question, one for you listening to think about. How does this whole story, from the Bomber Mafia's ideal to the firebombing to today's pinpoint weapons, shape how we should think about technology, ethics, and war today?
Yeah, what does this history tell us about the ongoing challenge, maybe the impossible challenge, of trying to make war less horrific, especially when new, powerful tools become available?
It's not an easy question.
Not at all. But hopefully this deep dive gave you some context and things to chew on. If this sparked your interest, there's so much more out there about the history of air power, the ethical debates, and these fascinating, flawed individuals. Definitely worth exploring further.